Welcome back to Culture is an Inside Job. Hey Karen, hey Scott, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I probably should stop asking that question, how are you doing today? Because it's really a shallow question. Maybe we should ask something a little deeper. How's your week been?
Hmm. Interesting. I just was on vacation, so that was good. In the middle of moving, so that's not so good, but all good.
So a
How's
mixture.
my face to that, Scott?
Yeah. So you went on vacation and
Yes,
that was really relaxing.
it was.
And on that vacation, you probably had a bathroom with a mirror.
I did
And then you come home to
my
a home
own.
without a bathroom, without a mirror. Fair?
Correct, correct.
Yeah. So you go from like mental bliss and peace of mind to what in the world's going on here?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, even though you don't have a mirror, you look amazing. So
Thank you.
why don't we just
Thank you.
start right there?
Perfect. I
Y-
appreciate that. I'm trying
Yes.
to smile.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
it shows.
Okay, good. And it sounds too, right? You can hear my smile.
I can.
Yes.
Okay, good.
It's
Yeah.
amazing what a smile does for us. I'm not even joking,
It's
right?
so true.
It is.
That's so true.
Can help uplift our mood and other people's moods for sure.
Yes.
Scott, what about you? How's your week?
Great. Fantastic. Yeah, really some balance and some more, I don't know, not filling my life full of a bunch of schedule stuff. And I'm living like my best life right now. So I'm really, I don't know. I need some bubble wrap to make sure I don't mess this up.
Actually, you just need to market whatever that is that you're taking so that we can all have some.
Perfect. Well, Nicorette gum is part
Okay,
of it.
yes.
Yes.
Hey, maybe we could get them as a
Sign me up.
sponsor.
Yeah. Culture's an Inside Job sponsored by Nicorette Gum.
Oh my goodness, here we go. Okay.
And how about you, Wendy?
Mm,
How's your week been?
really good. I, well, I mean, I would say if I think of the last full week, probably at the beginning of that last full week, probably a little, I don't know what the word is. I had some disappointment in my, business. But at the same time, I had the opportunity to go to a women's event this weekend. Shout out to Powerhouse Women and Lindsay Schwartz. It was absolutely amazing. So I was in a room full of, I don't know, I think they said there may have been like 500 women,
Mm.
and many of them entrepreneurs and people, just wanting to make a difference in the world, and had some amazing speakers. And so that was very inspirational and motivational. And what just came up for me around that is, again, the importance of us allowing those things in our life. And I say, as I say, right, giving ourselves space and grace. Um, because when we're in the day to day and we're just, I don't know whose word this is, but schlepping it, and and just in the day to day ick, really, sometimes we don't feel like we have the time to do those kinds of things, right? We give ourselves all kinds of excuses. But I was just reminded on my flight home yesterday, I was just reminded of, oh my gosh, like the power of that. Leaving, where we are, our typical um, home base, and being with different people and also just a different location. It's just, yeah, it's really encouraging. So thanks for asking. So, did you have a question, Karen? It looked like you were going to
No,
say
I was just wanting to kind of acknowledge what you just said and just say how important what you do for yourself, what you did for yourself was. Because the key piece to what you said was you're right, we do not give ourselves that well enough. And so the setting the intention is what allows us to transform. That's the game changer, right? So Scott, before we even started recording, you had said balance, giving yourself, being able to identify what's on your calendar, what's not on your calendar. to give yourself that space so that you can breathe and show up with intention and be present, right? So I need a little, I gotta find some intention. So yeah, I'm loving that you have it. I'm going to live vicariously through both of you.
Perfect. Well, hopefully we can help you along the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it
I've been,
does take, I'm sorry, I was just going to say the intentionality word. So let's just remember that, right? It takes
Mm-hmm.
intentionality. Scott, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
no, I've just, I've just been there. I know what that feels like. And it's, um, you just want out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
get me out of this spot. And it's a, uh, it's a sad place to be. But what I've also experienced in my own life is we were all in a place where we're supposed to be.
Thank you for that reminder, Scott. I heard that this weekend loud and clear. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And then it's like I've always said, and I don't mean to say that, Karen, you're at the bottom, but I tell a lot of people the bottom's a beautiful place to be because you got two choices. You can dig, or you can climb.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done both. And I'll tell you, climbing is a lot more fun than digging.
Yep. Throw me a landline.
Well, and we were talking about this before we hopped on too, and it was another thing that came up for me this morning before I even got on this call with you. And I think I was reminded this weekend. But it's okay for us to show up as our authentic selves, right? Yes, there is an importance of, and we talked about having a smile and the importance of that, what that does, even when you're feeling crappy. At the same time, it's okay to share when you're not feeling well, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally. And because that's the only way, if we don't share that, how in the world are we going to get the support that we need? And how in the world are we going to be able to help other people because they're like, "Oh my gosh, you too?" Right? So, I think that's really important to me is how can I keep showing up as my authentic self and invite other people into that as well?
It's funny. I was reading this book. It's called Social Cues. And I think the author was actually spoke at the Global Leadership Summit 2 years ago. Let me give her credit. Her name is
Is it
Vanessa.
Vanessa Van Edwards?
Yeah,
Oh,
fantastic.
she's awesome. Yeah.
But here's what she said, and you said this in the very beginning. You said what we have to do is, I said I'm going to stop asking that question because it's a very shallow question. And Vanessa talks about that.
Yes.
She said what we have to do is create this language that doesn't sound where we can't turn on our auto tapes. I'm fine. Everything's okay. I'm great.
Mhm.
They're just really compelling, interesting questions that kind of just provoke people to think differently about their response. And I've always liked that. I used to say the word awesome all the time. I hate that word. I can't stand it.
I say it a lot. I
I
gotta like.
know. Well, I mean, I think I overused it. So now I'm like on new words. And removing the auto tape questions in my mind they're healthy.
Mhm.
You get people to just kind of explore
Mhm.
differently about how they think about us, how they think about themselves and others.
Because it's normal that we do it, right? It's normal that we might answer fine or ask the question how are you because it's kind of so many of our operating system. And when we say fine, we're like, do they really want to hear how my weekend really was? No, they don't, right? At the same time, it isn't necessary because it is an opportunity for us to explore and go deeper with each other. So, oh my gosh, like we're talking about stuff we weren't even planning
Mm-hmm.
on. This is all
Mm-hmm.
good. This is all
Mm-hmm.
good stuff. But I think it takes us back to what we're going to focus on at the beginning of this podcast today, which is finishing up. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to listen to the other episodes, we would suggest that you do because we talk about our saboteurs in around a body of work called positive intelligence. And last time that we were together, I think we dove into what is hyper rational saboteur? What is the hyper vigilant? And we just started touching on the one that we call the victim, which none of us even like that word. Because those of you who've been following along and you remember from an energy leadership perspective, we even talk about the victim in level 1 in that too. And we don't like that. But we all have those moments. And so I thought maybe we could just quick reminder about what it is, and then we'll just jump into what's coming up for us around that. And as we discuss it, like, why does this matter when it comes to culture and leadership and all of that, both personally and professionally? So, as I define victim, that is just that emotional and temperamental, as a way to gain attention and affection, an extreme focus on internal feelings, particularly painful ones. And it's almost like a martyr streak. So first, I'll just stop there and say, ask Karen. Karen, is there anything else that you would describe victim as, like, for our listening audience?
Yeah, my favorite reference to the victim is this unconscious attachment to things being difficult. So one of the ways that we recognize ourselves in that place of victimhood might be, this is hard. And the more we perceive the experience as heavy and difficult, we know that we're feeling like a victim. Right, Mr. Mayor of victimhood? Ex-mayor, sorry.
Yeah.
Ex-mayor. Yeah. I got I got voted out, fortunately. There's a new
Good.
mayor of victimhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Scott, we would love to hear your story. And I know you've probably mentioned it a little bit on some of the other episodes. But Karen, before we do that, anything else that we need to share about this?
So one thing that's really important in my work as a coach, I see that there are all these saboteurs have some positive attributes and some negative attributes. Now, we don't necessarily like to use the words positive and negative because they can be very judgy. But in this instance, because we're talking about positive intelligence, I'm going to use positive and negative. So one of the things that's oftentimes I see is a low victim for folks that are leaders. And what I've found is when it's really, really super low, any saboteur, but let's just use the victim, for example. It could mean that we have some defiance around that. You said in the beginning, we don't like that word. No one wants to be a victim. No one wants to feel like a victim. And when we're very high achieving leaders, it's very rare that you will find us ever being willing to accept that level of vulnerability as a victim. Yet the positive attribute of the victim is, going back to what you said, Scott, the ability to raise your hand and ask for help when it is difficult. So how can we lean into the saboteurs and find where there are some positive attributes, not necessarily needing to over-index on them, obviously, but the positive attribute of the victim is that they know how to raise their hand and they know how to identify when it is too difficult.
I think it's a really complicated issue because there are real, like you said too, there are real victims and there is real injustice in people. And I would say where I came from in my own life, being the mayor of victimhood, was the fact that I really felt like my actions were really noble and really virtuous. Like, I woke up every morning and I wrote a script for Wendy, one for Karen, one for Taylor. I wrote it, and I spent all night writing that script. And then you guys showed up on the set and you didn't read your lines. You didn't behave the way I wanted you to. And then it was the world's fault that this world was not like turning on my axis. And it pissed me off and it exhausted me. And here's what's even worse is in my experience, where I kind of fell apart was victims where I was. I'll just talk about my own experience. I created my own work. Like I created everything in my life was around me being a victim, around people, places, and things. And it actually I got paid back. So people say all the time, um, I can't believe this has happened to me. I can't believe that this and that and everything. Well, here, we'll go do this. I don't want to go do that. I'm like, okay, so what are you getting out of where you are right now? Nothing. I'm like, well, that's a lie. That's a big lie. Like for me, if I looked back, I got paid back by being a victim. As wonky and as messed up as that was, I got paid back. I got paid emotionally, got paid back emotionally in very unhealthy ways, not healthy ways, but it felt like I was getting paid back. And kind of digging yourself out of victimhood, it's a lot of hard work. I think it belongs, and then I'll stop talking, but I think it belongs with the truth. I had my truth
Mm-hmm.
and I had the world's truth. And nothing changed until I was really, really willing to identify what is the truth. And inside of the truth, I got to identify my own narcissistic victimhood behaviors. And then I'll end with this. Here's what's crazy. For me, I really felt like I was put on this earth to save humanity as the mayor of victimhood. Now, I don't mean that like in such a grandiose way. But the other thing too is, and I hate to say this out loud, but people really don't care about you as much as you think they do. Like you think you're saving everybody. If you tell someone no, they'll go find someone else. Who in your right mind thinks you're that important, that you're the only person that can help people? Um, and that took me, I was in a meeting and I said I'd stop talking and now I can't stop.
No,
So let me tell you a story. So I walk into the recovery meetings at Southbrook and I walk in and I say, hey, my name's Scott. My soul is cooked. And I was just done emotionally, spiritually, just, I was at my bottom. And I was the mayor of victimhood. So I had the gavel and I'm in the meeting and I'm writing down the names of these other men in the room. And this old timer, we call him an old timer, real smart guy, walks up and says, hey, Scott, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm writing down the names of these guys. I'm going to pray for them. He goes, you're going to do what? I said, I'm going to pray for them. And then he said, how'd you get here? And I was like, well, I drove here. He said, yeah. I think everybody knows you drove here. No, I mean, how'd you get here? Why'd you walk in this room? And I told him. And when he said this, it really made me mad. Like it torqued the victim in me. It torqued me. But today it was one of the wisest things I've ever heard. He said, hey, look, you got here, you did your very best, and you ended up in a recovery room at a church. That was your best. Do you believe in a really big, powerful God? And I'm like, I do. He goes, well, do me a favor. Why don't you let God worry about those 5 guys you just wrote down on a piece of paper? And why don't you just start working on yourself?
oh,
Back then, I thought it was such an arrogant statement. Like, how could you tell me not to help these people? Today, I really believe, I believe in my own life, like my faith's super important. And I think God speaks to other people because I've never seen that guy again. And like, there's a part of me that believes God's like, all right, I
We
gotta
got to
send
drop
this.
somebody down here to send
I
him a
gotta,
message.
I gotta send this guy down here. But today it's like one of the most, I thought it was the most arrogant things I've ever heard. It was the most honest. It might have been the best tool, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. Does that make sense?
yes. And look how you remember that too and the
Oh,
impact that it had on your life. And I heard so much in all of that, Scott. First thing, as a reminder, we talk about, right, the gift of self awareness and how powerful that in itself is. And so many of us don't sit in that because it is hard work and because it is like, oh gosh, yeah, do I really see that within me? And then the second thing I heard you say, which is also so powerful, is the importance of knowing the difference between the truth capital T truth and our truth, little t truth, right? Because we sit here and we have these stories in our head, and to us, it is the truth. But until we step back and we challenge our perspective and we look for the objective evidence that is the truth, we could sit there and spin and spin and spin. So thank you for bringing that up. And I love your vulnerability, and I love how you are willing to share those stories and where you came from. And I want to ask you, when you think of when you were showing up more as the mayor of victimhood, right? Um, what was the impact now that you were where you're at? What was the impact that you saw on others, whether that was personally or professionally?
Gosh, I don't know, but I think professionally, and maybe even, in my family, this is my own opinion. But where I showed up is I was like a perfectionist. Everything had to be perfect. And if you didn't play by my rules, like I can remember growing up and my kids got their driver's license, I put paint on the garage floor for them, like where to park their cars. Like, this is where your cars go. And I'm sure, like, even with Taylor and Courtney and even with Lori, it was just like, this guy, I mean, they probably had parties when I left, not when I came home. And the same thing probably happened here. It's just like, here he comes. I mean, like, okay, here we go again. And it wears people out. It exhausts them. You're not
Mhm.
attractive I don't mean attractive in a vain way, but attractive in a way where if you walk into a room, people want to come towards you. If you walk into a room, they dissipate.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can have a big effect on other people. But then again, the victim, you feel like you're doing such wonderful work. Like,
Mhm.
you feel like what you're doing matters and nobody else cares as much as you. So it's in my own mind, it's really complicated. I mean, it's a heart issue. It's a heart issue. And it's probably the number one asset of codependency,
Mm.
of enabling and all of that. So that's hard to unpack. It takes a lot of time to figure out how to move out of that zip code
It
into
is,
another.
and especially when we've got so much history in it, right? I mean,
And we're good at it.
because like we talked about, yes, we do become very good at it. In all of these saboteurs, remember, for those of you who haven't heard this, it's a reminder that they all came from when we were young. They all came from when we were a child, whether it was, you know, a perceived threat and that saboteurs thought it needed to show up, or it was an actual threat, right? And so when that starts happening when we're young, it is hard to undo all of that. Karen, what's coming up for you around this?
I love the ick factor that Scott shared. That um I think that's the first sign of self-awareness, that the minute that he gave you that story, you're like, "Oh, no, 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 no." And that defiance right there is enough for you to recognize, "Oh, wait. What is about this that I don't want to know?" Right? And
Mhm.
so I use the term ICK, as the inner conflict of knowing. That's that truth that cannot and will not be denied. But until you look that truth right in the face, it is going to continue to poke and rear its ugly head every chance it can, until you finally listen, until you finally go, why is this so uncomfortable? So, Scott, think about the minute that you heard that and you just felt like, no, this is the worst thing that I could have heard this guy say. But you then somehow or another, he planted a seed and that started to grow. And that's how a little bit more self-awareness and the willingness to sit in those meetings and to learn more about yourself and to unpack and unpeel. That's where you get to truth.
I still have that piece of paper. I bet you it took 2 or 3 years for me to even acknowledge that guy. What he said was profound and wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I was willing to give him credit
Mhm.
because I kept going back. And they say, keep coming back. It works if you work it, sucks if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've always said, keep coming back. It works because you're worth it. So in that exploration, you're able to maybe take those people, places, and things that pissed you
Mm-hmm.
off.
Mm-hmm. Your greatest
And
gifts.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you were so mad. And then you look back and it's like, oh. I remember my dad one time, I said, I want to join Sycamore Country Club. He goes, Scott, possessions and things will not make you happy. And I said, Dad, you belong to Sycamore and you look happy. But deep down back then, I mean, he was right. I didn't want to listen to him. I mean, I just didn't. I wanted to, I wanted to take what I wanted, and that's what I wanted. And so it's good stuff.
Karen, I know you had mentioned um, that your victim is probably showing up a little bit louder than it typically does right now for a lot of, really normal reasons. And so if we remember in our last episodes, and you introduced this, right? The importance of, gosh, what's a question that we can ask ourselves to help us to shift our thinking around this.
Mm-hmm.
So what comes up for you around that? What's a powerful question that you might ask yourself?
Mm. So thank you. This is beautiful. I First of all, let me just say that when we are in this place of feeling like that victim, very attached to our story, we cannot see options,
Mm-hmm.
right? Scott, you just talked about that. Like it took you a long time to want to even look elsewhere for an option. We get stuck in our story. So I think right now, in recognizing that I'm kind of moving in and out of this victimhood place, right? Literally, figuratively, and literally. My question probably would be, how long do I want to stay here?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Literally and figuratively. What are my options?
Yeah,
If
that's
I were to just get to coping and rationalizing, what would I want to do differently for myself?
hmm yeah, and I'm glad you asked that. That's the question, because first it's a reminder that it's not to shame ourselves. And even again, if we go back to the levels of energy in level one, there's a time and a place for that. But your question is so beautiful, which is we get to choose how long do I want to stay here? And I always like to add on that piece, how is it serving you
Mm-hmm.
or how is it not serving you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I like what you said too. I think understanding that victims are stuck in their story. So maybe great advice for people that maybe are talking with victims is tell me your story. And then
Acknowledging and validating that.
yeah, just
Absolutely.
like
Mm-hmm.
bringing that to life. Because
Yeah.
if they can't see it, well, if they don't tell you, you can't see it either. But they can bring that to life in words. And then I think even, like kind of like what Vanessa Van Edwards says is like just asking compelling questions. What could you do to change part of that narrative, that story? Like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what would look differently? Um, that's a lot better than leaning in with sympathy. Oh, you poor person, because that's that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, in my own experience, that's all I wanted was, oh my gosh, you work so much, you are so, oh my god, you're amazing. How do you get it all done?
Mhm.
All of that stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the reality of it is that we all want to be acknowledged. And there are degrees to that. And some of us feel like we need to be acknowledged and be validated by everybody else in order to feel worthy and have value. But the art of acknowledging and validating is such a gift to each other when we are in those places. We're acknowledging, we're hearing them, what they're saying, what they're going through. And I won't talk long about this because as we know, validating is not an easy skill to do in coaching, especially when it comes to like also like personal stuff. but we're validating the emotion. That's all we need to know. We're validating their feeling and their emotion, not their story or whatever they're in. And when we do that, someone's like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, it's okay to be angry right now about XYZ. So, yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, Scott.
That's really interesting. Validating their emotion
Mhm.
versus their action or what actually would happen. Do they see that?
Because that's what holds us back from validating. And I'll just use myself as an example.
Oh, that is
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
powerful.
Yeah.
100%. I can see
Yeah.
that. Okay.
So, because again, professionally as a coach, it's what we do, and I feel like I do that pretty well with my clients. When it comes to a personal situation, though, if I'm talking to someone where there's a lot of emotion or someone's upset with me or what have you, it's really hard to validate the way that they're feeling because I feel like that means I'm making them right, right? And that's not the case because it's their perspective, it's their story, it's not mine. So it's okay for me to validate how they're feeling about it because I'm not in their shoes, right? It's okay for them to feel that way. And when we do that, it it starts to deflate that big emotion. So I won't go any further than that because we could probably have a whole episode on that coaching skill. But
Yeah,
No, I love that.
I want to just say another aspect to that real quick, Scott, would be to consider if you know what their values are, they may be different than yours. Easy to validate their values. It makes sense because this is important to you based on X, Y, and Z value, right? It doesn't have to be your value. It's their value. You don't have to get into their story when you can acknowledge and validate the way they think and feel based on their values, right?
Yeah, I go back to this. Have you ever read the book, The Five Love Languages?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So my like love language is words of affirmation. Shocker.
Mm.
But if a victim, so think about that. That's my love language. And you go back 20 years or 17 years, and I'm a victim because I never heard them. And even if I did hear them, I didn't believe them. So it was this dark, icky quest for that. Now, my wife's love language is acts of service, small acts of service. I thought it was always jewelry, right? So it's like making the bed and doing the dishwasher. It's
Mhm.
which blows me away. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
So understanding someone's love language or their values helps, well, in such a big way.
It really does.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, anything else that we need to say from a culture or leadership perspective when it comes to the victim as a saboteur and anything we need to bring up? What's coming up for the both of you? I really love what we've been sharing so far.
Two things. One is when you meet someone else that is a high victim, you know it pretty much right away. It sounds this like this is hard. Woe is me, right? Again, meeting them where they are does not need to be you are in their story. It's just the acknowledging and validating that it's important that yes, you're hearing and seeing them. When we have our own high victim or in an experience that we are feeling like a high victim, there's a strength of that to be able to recognize, yes, I can ask for help. When we have a very low victim, leveraging the strength of that, knowing when we can ask for help, can release some of our top saboteurs. So for me, that really high level stickler, if I were to raise my hand and ask for help more of the victim, see, so I'm trying right now to leverage my victim by releasing the need to project perfection on everyone, Scott. So this might make some sense to that little stickler that is very high for you too, right? Recognizing that when it's uncomfortable that here everyone's not showing up as well as I need them to, and now that's making me feel like a victim. rather than being in the story of the victim. I just need to be able to communicate what I need, set stronger boundaries around that, and recognize not needing to project perfection, but rather be more communicative of how do we collaborate? How do we coordinate? What does good communication look like? So I'm not continuing to feel like a victim. I'm not projecting perfection. And it's a little bit more of a dance. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Scott, anything that comes up for you to wrap this up?
No, I think it's a super. I always say this all the time. I say no, and then I start talking, which is really interesting. So,
It's all good.
but I do think all of these assets. One is, and Wendy, you brought this up, is we learn these traits when we're really little, and for the most part, these saboteurs they're like villains, and it's a cape we put on. Now, if
Mhm.
you acknowledge the fact that you're putting on that cape because when you were little, that protected you in some way or another. It protected you,
Yeah.
and you were young in character, young in virtue, young in maturity, young in emotional intelligence. But it's an asset that protected you as a child. But as we grow older and we get maybe deeper competence and deeper understanding, unfortunately, we still put that cape on. And the superpower is to acknowledge the fact that it can be different. Because I think Wendy, you and I and Karen, we were talking about this earlier. If I would have taken that survey 17 years ago, victim would have been number one. I don't even know where it is today, but it's like it's on the bottom. Now I still have other things I have to work on, right? But that's not one of them anymore. And I think all we're maybe recommending is, and letting people know is, and as maybe as hard and as dark as some parts of your life can be, there is light on the other side, and it is beautiful, and just be brave and have the courage to just stretch out and do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that reminder, Scott, about what we were talking about earlier and where you came from, because it gives all of us hope that if we have one of those saboteurs that is really loud for us and we don't feel like we're going to ever be able to quiet it, it is possible, right? And it is a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey because it's something that, we just have to continue to work at and trust the process.
Yeah, I love that. It's the awareness is our first line of defense, right? Once we realize it, then we get to consciously choose.
Yeah. So I'd love for us to maybe dive just a little bit more into how we quiet, but I think maybe for this episode, we could wrap up just by asking the question, as we say, let's go inside. And so, what might be a way for our listeners to go a little bit deeper inside around this piece, especially with the victim? Comes up for the two of you.
That's a really good question. Well, I think number one would be the people listening. Have you actually taken it? So have you taken the survey?
Positiveintelligence.com and then go to the saboteur assessment.
And there's a lot of information in there. And then if you look at that, you'd have to say, is this important to me or not? And if it's important to you, then I would just really lean into it in a deep way. With a victim, it I think if I was going to ask somebody to consider how much of all the things that are bothering you in your story, I wouldn't even use the word story because that almost makes it like it's not even real for them in your life that's going on. How much of that do you really have control over? Like, I want you to put like a T chart. Mass, I have control, I have no control. Because people complain all the time about the stock market. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my tail. I'm like, well, what control do you have over it? Well, I have lots of control. No, you don't. You have none. If you don't want that, then don't invest in the market. Because the next day you're going to be talking to me about how great it is. So just either, be quiet or get out.
Mm-hmm.
But it would probably just to one acknowledge what do I have control over and what don't I have control over is
Yeah,
my
that's
advice.
good. And the last thing I think I'll add is Karen's question that she asked herself, right? So if you have this really loud victim, which we all do from time to time, how long do I want to stay here? So how long do you want to stay there? How is it serving you, or how is it not serving you? And with that, we will see you next time.